All right, welcome to the Pangburn Podcast. This is Travis Pangburn. Today, I'm super excited to be in Ketchikan, Alaska, and I am speaking with Chazz Gist. He is a local musician and also has a deep interest in philosophy and science. And I met him at this jam bar near the ship dock, and I really want to talk about that a little bit because I really find it to be a really interesting place. There's lots of sharing of artistic inspiration going on there, which is really important for communities. And I talk about this a lot, that you need to have a good balance of art and science in communities. And so I was really excited to do this. And I've started calling Chazz the Alaskan philosopher. And I don't know if that's going to stick, but anyways, thanks for coming on the podcast, Chazz.
Thank you.
Why don't you talk to me a little bit about what brought your family to Ketchikan? Have they always been here? Or?
My mom moved to Ketchikan in the early 80s, and she moved from a hippie commune down in Santa Fe, and where my sister was born in a school bus, and they all had hippie names. She was Moon Peach Sunbeam. And they moved to a homestead just across over there, across on the adjacent island to us. And they lived in a school bus, and then they built some kind of cabin, and then...
Okay, yeah. So we got to go...
There's a lot of stuff.
We got to talk about those names.
Yeah.
So first one, Moonbeam.
Moon Peach Sunbeam was her full name.
Moon Peach Sunbeam was her full name.
Yes.
Now, was there any significance as to why these things?
Her head was fuzzy like a peach.
Right.
So I think that's the peach part. The rest is just hippie nonsense for the most part.
Well, we already have something in common because where I come from, in the interior of BC, I definitely knew a dragonfly, a man's name dragonfly, a rainbow.
Yeah.
I believe someone by the name of Caesar Salad.
Yeah.
So I've come across some funky hippie names because there's a strong hippie community in the Kootenays for sure. Well, that's cool. And she just thought that this would be a cool place to.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is where she found land, or what forest brought her to Ketchikan itself, as opposed to some other just keeping going on up north and finding some other little community. But I'm glad she did. It's a very supportive community of arts and stuff, and it's been a nice place to grow up. Very peaceful.
Right. And what keeps you going? What keeps you motivated living? So, a lot of people would be like, I would shoot myself in the head if I had to live somewhere like this.
It is very isolated.
It seems isolated, and it seems like you wouldn't be able to do the things that you could do if you weren't isolated.
Right.
But does the isolation really get to you, or does it even mean anything?
It doesn't mean anything to me.
Right.
I mean, everybody's on the internet now, so it means even less.
Right.
But also, I've always been here and haven't known much different for any long period of time.
Right.
I've gone down south a few times where I'm totally not isolated and you can drive anywhere, but it hasn't impressed me very much.
So that's interesting. You say you can go down south where you can drive anywhere.
Yeah.
So you would mean basically anywhere but Alaska.
Yes. Yeah. Because all the little communities in southeast are on islands, and so are, separated, like way more separated than any two places down south.
Right.
And you have to fly or take a ferry or a boat or something to get anywhere.
Did you grow up fishing and hunting and doing the wildlife thing?
Subsistence when we were on the island. So when I moved to town so I can go to school, kindergarten and stuff. And we moved just to a closer island, which is Pennock, with a little one right across here. And I would take the boat across to go to school.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So you take a boat to school every morning. Mm-hmm. Was it cold?
Sometimes it's cold.
Yeah. Yep. But one thing I'm starting to realize is that the temperature levels here are basically the same as Vancouver.
Yeah, more or less. It doesn't get much below freezing.
Right.
Even midwinter, if it snows, the rain tends to just wash it away.
Right.
So
yeah,
it's not a big deal.
It's very similar to Vancouver.
And we're right on latitude with London. Anyway.
Right. So you're not living in an igloo up here.
No.
You're not living in like 40 feet of snow. A lot of people, when they think of Alaska, they think of snow-covered everything, right?
Yeah.
And really, I think they're thinking of Antarctica when they're
Antarctica and far north Yukon territory, Canada,
right. Yeah.
and stuff. And there's definitely places like that in Alaska where it gets a ton of snow. But there's no one really uses igloos. Igloos are really a Canadian kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Sounds like something a Canadian would do.
Yeah.
And I actually learned from the naturist on board, or the nature host, that
naturalist.
Yeah, well, he's he basically is a wealth of knowledge on all nature Alaska, and he was basically explaining to me that igloos are actually not something indigenous people would live in.
Right.
They built them
It's like a
to survive
thing, yeah.
to survive the wind chill death that would inevitably get them if they didn't cover themselves from the wind chill. And then you have to rock inside the thing even to keep your body moving. Like it just sounded terrible.
Yeah.
And growing up, like, I'm pretty sure I was convinced that at least somewhere people were living in igloos. And maybe that's a sexier story than the one about hiding from wind chill death, but who knows?
Yeah.
So what kind of things do you do? I know you're an accomplished musician, and everyone just is going to get to see a clip of us jamming together, and you got your band you play with. So why don't you tell me a bit about your music background?
Well, I've been playing music since I was in a metal band in high school, and we had a progressive thrash metal band called Pariah, which was pretty sick at the time.
Did you play your stand-up bass in
No,
that
I
band?
play electric. I started with electric. There's no string programs in Ketchikan.
Okay.
It's just there's jazz programs and kind of wind ensembles and things at the high school level. So I played electric until I went to college. And in college, if you study bass at the collegiate level, chances are you're going to study upright.
Right.
And then even then, it's about 50-50 when I gig on bass. When I'm playing at the club, the jam bar during the day, I'm mostly playing the upright. But I have an electric there, and for bars at nights, I'm usually playing electric. I usually practice electric at home.
Yeah.
So it's great to be able to do both.
And how's the metal scene in Ketchikan?
There's not really one, no.
Yeah.
No. There was a lot more when I was in high school. There was like 3 metal bands in our high school, and now all the kids are wearing colorful clothes and stuff. No spikes. Metal's gone downhill.
Although, correct me if I'm wrong, like in most small towns, if you were to organize a metal show, you would still probably get an audience.
You'd get some kind of audience.
Yeah.
People are like, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
And then, we did
check
some of
it out.
those. But there's no, for the most part, in a small place, there's not much money in metal. And I still listen to it, but during the day, I'm playing jazz most of the time at the club. During nights, I'm playing a lot of classical music in a string trio. And then weekend nights at bars, I'll play funk and rap jams.
Right.
With different sorts of groups.
Rap jams.
Yeah.
A lot of rappers around?
Well, there's just one guy.
Oh,
There's
okay.
one guy who kind of raps over things. And
Dude, that's with every small town. It's
Yeah.
like every small town's got these guys or girls that do their thing, and you know who they are.
Yes.
This reminds me of this guy named Hank Van Tool I believe, he passed away years ago, but he was a flute player and a sax player, but he owned this beautiful farm.
Right.
And he was known as like one of the most hardworking guys ever. And I grew up with his kids and stuff. And he would do these poems. So he would show up for like the May Days weekend fair, and he would do what he called poems, where he's got his flute up like this, and he would play something. He'd go, and then he would say, old man looking out the window, young man looking in the window. Old man looking out, young man looking in. So it was like Samuel Beckett meets classical music meets like metal flute.
Okay.
Like it was really cool, but that was like he was the guy, he was the poem guy that I remember in town, and unique characters coming out of the woodwork. I'm sure in the cities you can find places where you can, because people like interesting people like that exist everywhere. But I don't think, like when I'm in the city, I don't find myself in those places because there's more options and it's like something about a small town, even growing up in a small school. I don't know if this was your experience, but you're kind of forced to become friends even with people that if you were in a bigger city, your paths might not cross if you have more options.
It's easy to just let people go, and this person doesn't isn't particularly useful to me at all.
Right.
Or like, oh, they're interesting, but
Right.
there's enough to do.
Right.
You're just really busy, and so
Right.
it's easy to write people off.
Yeah. And also like I guess dating too, right?
Yeah.
So what was
same
the
thing.
like I gotta like growing up, because you did all your high school in Ketchikan, is
Yeah.
that right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So what was that like? Like I imagine like everyone had dated everyone at some point.
There's a pretty small pool, and I guess people casually date and hook up all the time still, and I have a hard time with that because this is such a small place, and if you just like casual sex, you're just gonna see that person everywhere.
And you don't
if you
want,
screw up with
yeah.
somebody, everybody's gonna know about it. If you do,
And obviously having a metal or even maybe death or corpse metal background, you probably are into some weird, freaky, devilish sex shit that
one would imagine
that word will get around quickly.
Yeah.
And you might start attracting different types of people
maybe
trying to track you down.
I don't screw around with it too much. I had a long-term girlfriend through high school and most of college, but a lot of my friends have gotten some people pregnant.
Yeah. And
that
how does that,
happens.
so like my hometown, they get pregnant young, so they tend to stick around and make a life here.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Or move to
it's
where
hard
there's
to say.
more work. I guess that depends.
A lot of times, right after high school, most people try and move away, and they'll have to move away for college most likely, and if they go to college. So they go off somewhere, try and figure out their life, find out most of the world sucks, and probably come back to Ketchikan.
Right.
Most of the time.
And where did you go to college?
I went to Fairbanks, UAF in Fairbanks.
Okay. In Fairbanks. And where's Fairbanks?
Fairbanks is way up north in Alaska, about
okay.
4 or 5 hours north of Anchorage.
And would that be one of the main colleges in Alaska, you would say?
That's the oldest and most well-known college.
Okay.
Is the Fairbanks campus. It's part of the UA system, and Anchorage has a campus, Juneau has a campus, but Fairbanks is the main campus.
And compared to other places of the United States, how does the cost vary versus going to college in, northern Alaska versus down in some big city?
As an Alaskan, it's much cheaper, and there's a lot of grants and things to help you get through.
Right.
But and even coming in from out of state, I'm sure it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
And
yeah. So it's not like bank breaking up here.
I don't think so.
Okay.
And it's mostly most well known for engineering school and Arctic engineering, Arctic research, climate research.
Very cool.
Things like that. So there's some cool things going on. It's one of the only universities with its own space program. They send up satellites to do research on the aurora and on the atmosphere.
Very
in
cool.
the Arctic. So there's some cool stuff going
and
on.
Did you ever have an interest in going into those fields, or was it always just music for you?
I was interested in those fields, but I didn't study them really when I was up there.
I mean, the reason why I asked, because I would have been so addicted to that, like if I grew up around it.
Yeah.
I mean, not much with regards, mostly forestry science is
There's
what
a lot
was
of
going
those
on
up there because a lot of people go into the Forest Service, and so there's a lot of those kids up there, and you can always tell by their clothing. Usually, they're always wearing some kind of outdoorsy jacket and extra tough boots, just like I'm wearing now.
Right.
And hey, that's a forestry program guy.
Right. Yeah, they look like they've been bushwhacking all day.
Yeah.
Nice. And where did this interest in philosophy come from?
I've always just paid close attention to what I'm thinking and feeling and what other people are doing and thinking, and just a general interest in ideas.
Yeah.
And trying to know the truth of things.
Yeah, and that's not normal. So one thing I'm realizing is that the more I've worked in the field of intellectualism is that you are not normal. I am like, we're not normal as far as like, you care to know, whereas many people don't care to know certain things. Yeah. But it bothers you when you don't know something about, something you're interested in, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of people are saying, like, a lot of people are fine saying, I don't know about something that even interests them, and not going and seeking further answers and discovering. But you seem like someone that likes to gain knowledge on things, and also you're not only interested in what is, but what ought to be, and that's basically the driving force behind philosophy. So do you see yourself thinking about your community and Alaska and things that could be better from a philosophical standpoint?
Especially lately, Alaska's gone through a lot of political nonsense. And we've talked about it before, where it's kind of a microcosm of national politics now.
Right.
Where we have this kind of giant douchebag who's suddenly in charge of things.
Right.
And
And who is that?
This is Governor Mike Dunleavy.
Okay.
Is causing a lot of drama with the state budget right now, and just what the state values.
Right. And what is his problem? How can he be better?
He could be better. Oh, gosh. Just empathy.
Right.
Having more empathy for all these different programs, and having, well, the idea is Alaska doesn't pay taxes. We don't pay, as a citizen, I don't pay anything to the state government. To local governments.
Including your income.
There's no income tax, no sales tax to the state. Maybe there's different fees for licenses and stuff that go to the state, but that's about it.
Shit, I might move here.
Yeah, well, all the state money comes from oil,
right,
for the most part.
Right.
So they, as oil companies take out barrels of oil, we get a certain amount of money per barrel. And when oil goes down, our revenue goes down quite a bit. And then most of those profits go into the permanent fund dividend. And lately, last few years, the last governor has been using a chunk of money from the permanent fund to help fund the state as oil prices have gone down and state loses money.
Right.
Which the permanent funds check for a couple $1,000s or so that we get every year.
Right.
And so
what do you spend that on? When you get that check you're not expecting. You just save it?
I've always saved them.
So it comes in check form.
Yeah,
in
you
your
get
mail.
a check, or it could just go straight to your bank.
Right.
And a lot of people really rely on it, especially if you're in a...
And do you know the date that it hits your account?
October, sometime mid-October.
Right.
I want to say November.
So that's like party time.
It is for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I just store them all the way. The check doesn't make a difference to me.
Right.
If I'm relying on the check, then I'm in a bad situation.
Right. And what do you think of the idea of this being implemented like on a more regular basis all around the United States, like universal income?
Well, Andrew Yang is talking about the universal income.
Yeah, he is. He's really pushing it.
And there's some interesting thoughts. And if the big tech companies like Amazon were taxed the way he's talking about with what's he calling it? Well, he's saying he taxes their actual profits and gains rather than taxing or how it works now is that it's really easy to game the system and not pay any taxes. Yeah. So just taking out those loopholes, and it all seems very obvious, and that would be an incredible amount of money.
Yeah, because obviously you want companies like Amazon to do well. Like that's what makes America strong, right? Having companies like this doing business. Right. But you also want them to pay their fair share. And and what needs to happen is someone needs to say, or a group of economists need to get together and say, this is what a fair share looks like for a company this size. And I think what Andrew Yang is pushing here is interesting. And the most interesting thing I find about this is that if you give citizens $1,000 a month extra, a lot of that money is going to go back into the American economy, right?
Yeah, most people are living check to check, as he's saying, apparently.
Yeah.
So
and I mean, and it's true that some people might spend their money outside the country.
Yeah.
But you have to take into consideration the amount of well-being that is being derived from those funds being spent out of the country for the American citizen. If the American citizen is using that $1,000 to save up a vacation fund so that they can do a really nice vacation every year, you have to calculate the amount of well-being that's being derived from that and take that into consideration when you're looking at the overall economical effect on well-being in the country. I mean, the bill for this is massive.
Yes.
But the effect it could have on the country could be very impressive too. Yeah. Like all of a sudden people might want to start moving back to the United States or living there temporarily. So you're in favor of trying something like this?
I think the way Andrew Yang puts it, it all kind of makes a lot of sense.
And obviously automation is a big part of this.
Yeah. And that's like Sam Harris's position on universal basic income is that eventually automation will just take out most of human labor, and so
Right.
many people will not be able to really have a job.
Yeah. Something needs to subsidize that.
Yeah,
right?
they could if they had a universal basic income, they could still pursue their interests. And if the people who are making incredible amounts of money on all the automation, just put some of that towards this fund,
The citizens.
the
yeah.
citizens
Yeah.
themselves, the people who can't work because everything's automated, and a certain amount of people like you have engineers who are going to be working on all those systems and all these
Yeah.
like higher level jobs, but so many people are just going to continue being put out of work.
Yeah. And this would be a now is this going to cause any do you foresee any amount of catastrophe coming from implementing such a huge it is a huge ideological change
Yeah.
of the way you look at workforce, the way you look at the value of someone in society. If people are living off money from the government, is this going to do something to circumvent the idea of capitalism, where I think capitalism is very important
Right.
from an economic position, because it does force people to want to climb the ladder.
Yeah.
And that really does do a lot for the country. Now, is something like this going to remove that ladder, and are people just going to be bumming around? Like, that's the extreme example.
Yeah.
Or are most people going to be investing their money in new businesses that are needed?
Yeah.
Is this going to allow the United States to combat what China's been doing with manufacturing?
Right.
Like, is there going to be more people wanting to get into manufacturing at a cheap price, finding ways to do that? Because, as automation gets cheaper, they might be able to set up their own automated factories,
Yeah.
small versions. Like this is the dream of people like Andrew Yang.
Yeah.
And then the critics are obviously saying, well, fuck, what is someone going to have to work toward if you take away their need to work? Like, it's...
I think people will have less pressure to work some shitty job they don't need, don't want rather. So like so many jobs are just a thing because I need money, and it's not that they're passionate about their work. And younger people these days are more concerned about personally valuing their work and feeling that it is not a useless job,
Right.
like some pencil pusher or
Yeah.
something.
Well, I think my generation is kind of the start of this idea that you don't have to have a single career. You can have multiple careers going at the same time. You can have multiple like there's lots of people selling stuff online, taking side gigs and do it, just expanding what they do. And it's not about necessarily doing one job for 20, 25 years and then retiring. It's like, it seems like my generation and younger generations have kind of moved towards living as though you're kind of retired always, but making sure that you're not like being you're not forgetting that in the future you're likely going to need to have some assistance with living, and you're going to you need to set yourself up in some way.
Well, if you're getting $1,000 a month, it's a heck of a lot easier to pursue your own career goals and make your own business.
Right.
And that's an incredible
And if someone just has that transfer into a tax-free savings account instead of going into their account,
right,
at the end of every year, you have $12,000 to invest.
Yeah.
And not even just invest. And like I said, this is where, some of the critics say, if someone saves up that money, that $12,000 can do huge for them in the business market in the Philippines, say, where the American dollar is going to go so far.
Yeah.
So it's like, how many people are going to take that route and start building businesses where the economy, where the devaluation of currency is so low that they're going to be able to do so much with it? Or are they really going to stick to America and try to make America great again?
Right.
Yeah.
That's really hard to say. I listened to one interview with Andrew where he's saying that expats or people who are traveling or working outside of the country, that they're still getting the $12,000 a month, but it's being held. And once they get back to the U.S., they have all that money, and conceivably they could just take it back with them. So I don't know if there'll be anything put in place to stop the free movement of this money. And it's just hard to say. And could be that even were Andrew Yang to get into office, he would have to push this giant thing through Congress and all the checks and balances we have. Were it to work at all, it would probably start at a much lower rate.
I actually like the idea of what you said of protecting, like if the United States protected that $1,000 and it actually had to be spent within the United States, that does clear up some of the critique, right? Obviously, managing that,
it then becomes an expensive process.
This is a really expensive thing, considering that every citizen in the country, it's basically a new tax system. So the government would have to. They're investing in well-being, I think, at that point. Managing this new economic system that's going to do wonders for the well-being. Maybe there will be, I've heard economists say that the potential well-being that can be gained is not good enough compared to the potential catastrophe that could happen as far as people bumming out, right? And it's hard. It's hard for me because I do understand that in some communities, for instance, like the old adage, you don't want to keep giving a drug addict, and this is extreme, a drug addict money, right? Because it doesn't build the proper foundation and what they need to get out of that.
Charity is a very difficult thing.
It is
to manage, and
it is
just by nature of it. A certain amount of people are going to take advantage of it. But those people are probably living off government money anyway, as we speak. And so, as Andrew puts it, those any programs people are using would be the $1,000 a month would go into that, and any extra those programs would still exist, and they'd still be able to get those programs, but $1,000 of that money would be taken away from there, and they would still just get it as a check.
Right.
And which would also, in some ways, be a lot more efficient, because rather than the $1,000 that they're getting through these services, it's getting filtered down through all the different bureaucracies and things. They're taking energy from that chunk.
Maybe the $1,000 that's given to you can only be used for U.S. investment.
Yeah.
And then that way, those dollars that come in, they go into something controlled by the government called the U.S. Investment Bank.
Okay.
And then that money gets held to your name in trust.
Okay.
And it just keeps building until you sit down with an investment banker and you say, okay, I have, in 2 years, I have $24,000 sitting there.
Okay.
What in the U.S. market is something worth investing in? Well, there's this new technology that's being developed that they're really looking for investors. You can buy however many shares in this right now if you want. This would be a high risk investment, but high reward if it does take off on a global stage. And, our minds are telling us that this could do well. So maybe
it would work for people who aren't, like, a lot of the point would be to support people who actually need that $1,000.
Exactly.
So maybe it would be
totally
an option.
Agree. Yeah.
Right. So people who are making plenty of money and the $1,000 a month is just a pittance.
Yeah.
They can have some kind of private investment firm.
Yeah. So maybe it has to be welfare plus the either or.
Right.
But then welfare, it's like, then you get into the conversation of what is welfare.
Right.
Well, it basically is well-being.
Yeah.
And we have to take into consideration psychological well-being.
Yeah.
And someone might say, well, this Harley Davidson provides me with the psychological well-being that I need in my life. So, yeah. Okay, let's change tune a little bit here. I've noticed traveling around Alaska, many churches up here.
There's a lot of churches. I'll say that. When I was growing up,
is there anyone in them?
When I was growing up, I thought churches were just for weddings and funerals, and they're just like a building where people do these ceremonies. I didn't think anybody actually took them seriously.
You didn't realize they're doing animal sacrifices and they're constantly eating the body of dead gods.
The body of dead gods, all that. I didn't know, because it was a very unreligious household.
Yeah.
We just never talked about it. No one ever talked about it to me.
Right.
Alaskans, for the most part, aren't very evangelical. They
Right.
keep to themselves about those sorts of things.
Right.
And
so you would say, as far as belief in God goes up in Alaska, you will come across people who believe in God, but you're not going to come across many preachers and proselytizers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe more of that up north, and I found some of that when I was in Fairbanks. But for the most part, it's people have a very libertarian mindset about a lot of things.
Right.
And religion being one is none of your business. And if you ask about it, I'll talk about it. But
right.
for the most part, it never came up all through school. No one talked about it. I was never exposed to any kind of proselytizing.
Yeah, so you would say all these because they all seem to be in operation. Like,
Yeah, there is a lot of. It's a big red state. There's a lot of. There is plenty of religion, and but it's just nobody's really in your face about it.
Right.
But in some places, there's a rule where you can only have as many bars as you have churches.
Right.
And that's a story I heard in Homer, Alaska, where they have a bunch of kind of fake churches just so they could have a bunch of more bars.
Huh.
So that's a funny little
that's cool.
little thing. But
they had fake churches so that they could have more bars.
yes. So they build a church just so they can build a bar.
Sweet.
Yeah.
That's kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
So wait, the church to bar ratio needs to be
1-to-1 is my understanding, if that story is correct.
if that is correct, that is awesome. Like you could build like a small church for one human.
Yeah.
And say, this
Yeah.
is my
No,
church
this is
for
my
me.
church.
I stand literally where the cross is and it sits on my head.
Yeah.
And even if what if it's just like ticker tape or something?
Yeah.
Caution tape. Caution tape would be good around churches, I think.
Yeah.
But you set up caution tape, you put something on your head. This is my religious worship. Say we have a church.
Right.
My new bar, which I just spent $14 million on, is just down the street if you'd like a drink. I kind of like that system. It's like maybe, and I wonder if that like circumvents all the other legality behind opening up a bar, because that would even be funnier.
Yeah. Ketchikan has a limited, a set amount of liquor licenses. And so then if a bar closes down, the liquor license could be worth millions of dollars.
Unless you build a row of like 50 churches somewhere, then you can.
I don't know. I don't think Ketchikan has that rule, but it's. I've heard things like that, and there's like pressure to build a church if you to increase the bars in an
Interesting.
area.
And where do you think that pressure would come from? Is that governmental pressure?
It's just a funny little ordinance at the city level.
Ah,
yeah.
interesting.
So it's not every city. I think Homer's a pretty goofy little town.
So
it's very fun.
Is there any like kind of community prayer that's pushed on citizens from the community?
Well,
like
lately, last few
level?
years, there was a lot of drama in the Kenai, some building in Kenai. It's a courthouse or some borough building in Kenai where they were having prayer before their like city council meetings or whatever it was. And then a Satanist came up from Florida. They heard about this, and they came up and they did a satanic prayer, which was beautiful. And then it caused all this drama at there, and then they had to have that conversation about whether we can, who and what does it mean to pray at a government event.
It's funny that you use the word beautiful, because usually beautiful flowers, beautiful looking woman walking down the street, and this beautiful sermon.
Yes.
Satanic sermon.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I would have went in there with a goat head, like everything. Goat slaughter. So yeah, that's interesting. Like, and that is, the Satanists have done a really good job in the United States at pointing at where Christianity mostly is stepping way too far into government. Yeah. And then the Satanists show up,
pamphlets or whatever,
monuments.
Yeah.
And actually the American Atheists has done a really good job from a legal perspective at keeping everything in check as well. There's been quite a few lawsuits that they've won in where the government is displaying something and calling the U.S. a Christian nation or whatever. And so is it fair to say you would identify as an atheist then?
Yes.
Yeah. And then a lot of people, do you ever have conversations with people and they just don't understand what atheism is or means?
Getting back to Alaska's attitude towards those things, no one talks about it. I rarely get an opportunity to talk about it with someone who generally disagrees with me.
So that's why you were like I think when we first had a conversation, we started talking, you found out who I was, and then we started, I could tell you were salivating just that you could talk some, philosophy and deeper issues, because I get it. Like in a small town where I grew up,
you don't want to rock the boat in a small town and get people. I work with children all the time, and if people have some kind of, Chazz is like this, and
so people will see, people will see this, and then they're gonna say, they're going to show up with torches to your door, and then you're going to call me and say, well, I guess this religious thing is a little more underground and serious.
No, I think I'm good. I'm not saying anything too weird.
No, you're not.
Yeah, it just never occurred to me that there might be a God, and mom grew up Presbyterian or something,
Right.
but we never talked about it.
Yeah.
And I had a friend whose family was Catholic, and I spent a lot of time with him, and he would talk about stories and whatever, and I was like, oh, that's a little story. That's a story. That's fine.
Yeah.
You know, people have stories. Santa Claus is a story. We have all these different stories, and we don't take all those seriously.
Right.
And then I found out his mom took it really seriously. And I was like, whoa. And so it's just funny that it's a separate category for those silly-sounding stories.
Right.
And then these other silly-sounding stories.
Well, I think, and it's for the reason of, if you look at someone as intelligent as Jordan Peterson, who's still trying to cling on to the importance of Christianity because it meant a lot to him in his life, and trying to, and on a certain level, I do respect what he's doing, because he's not trying to do what the classic theologians have done in the past, trying to wish their God into actual existence.
Right. He's trying to say that these stories and beliefs have value, and they have effects on society. And so whether it's true in the sense that we think of true or not isn't really the question. So he's like arguing for a different premise than
he's arguing for a different truth, right?
Yeah.
Well, he's trying to redefine truth, and this is why him and Sam have had so much problem, because it is a disingenuous thing to argue when we're talking about the existence of God.
Right.
But you know, I also get that Jordan finds deep meaning in this piece of art. Yeah. And this is what I always try to get him to admit, that this is art. Yeah. It's art like any other art that's ever been written or drawn or anything. Mm-hmm. It's like full societies have worshipped totems as given to them by a god, when really it's just a piece of art that they've found deep meaning in. And they've applied, and sometimes it has led them to terrible things, sacrificing to the totem and stacking the skulls up, and it's just, and you know, and Christianity is not
has gone through those phases.
Exactly, it's got a lot of blood on its hands as well.
Been fairly tamed compared to some other religions, and so I think, Christianity isn't like that. But you know, we've gone through the Inquisition, gone through all these different stages over the course of its development to what modern Christians think of as their religion. Right.
Well, let's talk a little bit about you. You had some interest in my new book I'm working on. What and obviously, basically the premise of the book is how pleasure dictates everything in a human mind, and how I think we made a mistake in creating the term consciousness. Because I think it proposed something that isn't actually there, and that's why we're having so much trouble throughout history.
Creating a concept and then arguing about...
Exactly, which is the opposite of what we should be doing with discovery of what actually exists, right? This is a scientific question. If the scientific question is, does consciousness exist? The answer right now is, I don't know.
Right.
And that's as good. That's the same as the God proposition. If someone says to me, as an atheist, if they say, "Does God exist?" I say, "I don't know." It's not. I'm not going to take on the position of burden of proof to have to protect my claim that gods don't exist. It's just I don't know, because I haven't seen any evidence to evaluate. So I think we have made a mistake with consciousness, and I really think all it is our pleasure drive that is dictating what's going on. And I think it's very important to the system, the biological system, to have something to drive it, or else it wouldn't drive.
Okay.
And I call that pleasure. And what do you think about that?
Well, I think, so if pleasure is defined as the drive, the fundamental drive.
Yeah,
so maybe
I call it
like
the pleasure
with
drive.
A capital P, something like that.
Sure.
Okay, capital P pleasure, as opposed to something like a sensual pleasure.
Yeah. So pleasure meaning an impulse that the body creates through the communication through the nervous system to the brain. There is an impulse to do something to satisfy what the brain requires
Right.
through the nervous system. So that impulse is what I'm calling pleasure, because if we look at how human beings act, we don't act towards destruction unless that destruction is bringing us pleasure. In my in my research,
Yes.
So and then I think, well, then what is, then obviously chaos is not the driving force, or because if it was, I mean, we would, stuff would happen, and it's true the mind can go into chaos,
Sure.
and the hardware can become infected, and I'm willing to grant that. Yeah, I'm just talking about the human mind as it is, the hardware as it operates normally is based on pleasure. That's my premise.
Yeah. So what people are going to argue against you with that premise is they're probably not understanding the distinction with your version of pleasure
Right.
as a kind of a meta pleasure,
Right.
capital P pleasure. They're going to think that you're talking about hedonism.
Right.
And then they're going to say, well, they're going to use sensual pleasure and then something like fulfillment for like long-term goals.
Right.
And things that will, or as Jordan Peterson will talk about, pleasure in the long term and pleasure in the short term and
Right.
long-term fulfillment. And then those are very different values.
Sure. Yeah.
And so just being able to, making sure that you can distinguish between this just sense of sensual pleasure, and these are just cases of us using the same word for fundamentally different things, just like using beautiful for fundamentally different things, or using
Sure.
manner of things.
And words don't have intrinsic meaning. They just have usages, right? And I'm using this pleasure as in you have an impulse that needs to be satisfied.
Yes.
And I'm just calling that impulse a pleasure because there's something about that word, and it's true. Maybe the word is flawed, or maybe it means something to me in my research right now that isn't going to be easy to communicate to people, and that may require a new label for this.
Maybe find a German word or something.
And that's kind of why I call it pleasure drive as opposed to just pleasure. Like I guess I do call this the pleasure drive and not just pleasure. Like it's true that the word pleasure can be used, but the word pleasure drive, I think, is really what I'm getting at. Yeah. This is the drive that like, for instance, when it comes to moral decisions, I think this actually demonstrates beautifully what moral decisions are. All morals are subjective.
Okay.
And we have a moral decision ahead of us. Why is one moral decision made in this way and not the other? My only answer to that is it's satisfying the pleasure impulse, the pleasure drive that's coming from the nervous system in the brain, because that's what we've discovered through the research of chemistry and biology of what's going on. The nervous system is the way for the brain to gauge what pleasures are available to it, and it moves towards the one, and it's not necessarily the one that's going to give you the quickest pleasure. It's going the mind is going to take into consideration all of the implications around each decision. And I think this is why our minds make billions of calculations per second, because there's so much going on and so much that has to be calculated. And I think all of those calculations are just figuring out how am I going to get the most pleasure out of this next situation, but in next decision or next thought, because it really just derives, I think everything coming together, the regurgitation of all this is thought. Okay. That's when the thought appears.
The conscious thought. The conscious,
I guess
air quotes, because we might be you're kind of trying to sort of get rid of the term.
Yeah, I'm trying to, because I think consciousness is a sexy way of saying the regurgitation of what has already been decided.
Your brain vomiting up what it's decided that you're allowed to know.
It's decided, and it's shitting it out through your mouth, kind of. It's shitting it out through this filter, and then we become aware. aware.
Yeah.
That means once we are aware, the decision has already been made. And Sam Harris talks about this all the time. It's like, try to, in a perfect test for this, everyone who's listening should try this, is to try to think and predict what your next thought will be.
Yeah.
You can't do it. Our system does not allow it.
Yeah.
You can get ahead and use your mind and go, okay, boobs, 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 boobs. And it seems like I'm just thinking of boobs the whole time.
As one often does.
But I just said boobs, I think it was 5 times.
Okay.
Why didn't I say it 6 times? Why didn't I say it 4 times? It's like, I said it for more effect,
sixth time
right?
would not add to my pleasure. My pleasure I was like, it got monotonous. I was like, oh, I don't want to keep saying this.
Yeah, it got monotonous. Why didn't I say it 20 times, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if it would have been from a pleasure perspective, from like a comedy, a reaction out of you perspective, then I may have said it more times if I thought that you were, if you started
I was digging it and I was like,
digging
I like
it
the way,
and reacting because these are the calculations that are going on. So, yeah.
Okay. Then it's you may run into the sort of thing that Sam Harris has run into. In one of his books, he talked about, maybe it was The Moral Landscape or something, where well-being was his go-to, but then without really working hard to define well-being, as if it's obvious.
Yeah. So well-being, and this has been a recent discovery for me, that I think well-being is just a, even though we can demonstrate that things like drinking a cup of poison is bad for one's well-being, because if you're dead, which this will get you close to death, you will no longer be being. You can't have well-being if you're no longer being.
Yes.
And I don't think Sam has tackled that. Matt Dillahunty has tackled with that.
Okay.
Which I think is very smart to think of it that way. So I believe there are objective approaches to well-being where we can look at, but all of this is just cognitive tools based on what's pleasurable for us.
Yeah.
I think the well-being premise, this comes after pleasure. Like if we're talking about finding a way to teach the brain of how to think about certain things, we go from, okay, first of all, it has to be pleasurable for me to want to even consider well-being a useful thing, right?
Yeah.
And how do I consider that to be if I don't find it pleasurable? Well, I don't think you can. But it's true that as each proposition is proposed, this does open up a new layer of pleasure that can be pursued, right? So knowledge. So environment changes what you're able to access from a pleasure drive perspective.
Okay.
So it's like every time someone says something new, every moment almost, new potential pleasures are coming at you, including that if you hear a philosopher say something about well-being, if you find this a pleasurable pursuit to pursue this, then you'll pursue it. But if you don't, if you view it like Jordan Peterson does, like we have two intellects that are basically on the same level, talking about these concepts in very different ways, and one won't accept it because of the subjectivity of it.
Right.
Even though there are some objective ways to look at it, look at well-being. So I think those things, those concepts are environmental, not part of something that should be used as like we're acting like this comes before what we find pleasurable or something like that.
Okay. So the your environment kind of dictates your pleasure drive and what's available to you at any given moment.
Definitely. And that's why and it makes sense, because when we're born into the world, we're born with our hardware.
Right.
And hardware can be affected by medications and things like this, and psychological disorders, and like rewiring can happen. But I think this is all based on environment, and environment includes knowledge and all these things that you can pull from environment. I mean everything outside the nervous system and brain. The rest is just tubing and
So if you take an example of someone like a drug addict,
Right.
a meth addict or something,
Yeah.
What's going on with their pleasure drive when they're pursuing a drug, and the drug could kill them.
Yeah.
And even if it makes them feel really good for a little while, if we'll bring back well-being again, or maybe long-term fulfillment or something like that.
Yep.
With a few ideas are getting mixed up here, but what's pleasurable to them at that moment?
I get what you're asking.
Yeah, their pleasure drive is not working in their best interests.
Right. So although from a pleasure perspective, I believe that some of these psychological disorders they rewire the brain.
Okay.
And for instance, depression. If depression gets deep enough, I think the epitome of pleasure becomes suicide. And I think that's what leads to suicide.
Right.
It becomes the most pleasurable pursuit. And I think when there are a lot of other psychological disorders that lead down this road, but a depressed mind seems to always be present in most psychological disorders that lead to suicide.
Okay.
So this forming this and relating it to pleasure, I think it's evidence that when when our mind is becoming depressed, I feel like the brain is requiring quick fixes for this, and we're looking for the quick fix pleasure or pleasure drives, and when we look at a brain like the brain of an addict, if we look at a brain scan and how much of the brain is being used. Right. Like there's been a lot of studies on this that like it's so it becomes so one track. I think it's the pleasure drive that's kind of eating itself from a well-being perspective.
Okay.
So if we're looking at it purely from a well-being perspective, it's easy to say, "Oh my God, you're shooting that much heroin? Like that is terrible for your well-being." And this is where the flaw happens, where using well-being as the starting premise.
Yeah.
I think it comes after. Because, or else, if it came first, even if someone knew, I think the pleasure drive can override what we would consider well-being from a purely biological standpoint, right?
It seems to in the case of drug addicts. They perfectly know that what they're doing is not good for them.
Of course, and they can't. And something in them, and I would call the pleasure drive, is overruling reason, overruling. And I believe the reason why it's overruling is because our brain needs it from our nervous system. It needs it quick because the hardware is not being used properly.
Right.
That's what we know from scanning the brain of addicts. Or it's not being used to its full potential like it is in someone who's not pursuing pleasures like an addict. And sex addict, it's not only drug addict, it's sex addiction, like any kind of pleasure drive addiction that can happen. And then someone might say, well, because everything's predetermined, why are we even talking about this? Like from a pure, the Big Bang started for the laws of moving forward motion.
Right. If consciousness is an illusion and we don't have any control of our thoughts necessarily.
Which I think actually is the case.
Right.
But I still think we can affect the environment. And some of us, just based on determinism, we have no choice because of our chemistry and our nervous system and brain that we have to affect the environment. I don't think I had a choice in either coming to have this conversation with you or not, just based on pure determinism. It's chemical processes.
One pleasure drive to the next.
Yeah, exactly.
It's led everyone to whatever their current place is.
And that's and
perhaps
and I think that is what's going on with humans. And I know some philosophers and scientists have talked about this, but I want to bring this concept more to people because I think it is confusing to understand for a lot of people because they first of all, a lot of people think that they're in control of what they think.
Right.
And we gotta have people forget about that because when we see someone, and I think this is going to change a lot of when we see like a pedophile rape a child.
Right.
Everyone wants to say, well, I would never rape a child. Kill him. Like they have this attitude towards the pedophile of non-sympathetic or empathetic, which I think that is required in that situation. And this is a foreign concept to people, or even killing someone, killing a family, killing children. This is completely foreign and what people would consider social, like anti-human. People would consider this idea anti-human. Like to apply, if I'm talking to an extreme leftist about politics, and to apply some empathy or sympathy, or to paint Donald Trump as a human being who may in fact be trying his best, even if his best is dreadfully terrible to one's political perspective, or even if it is scientifically, statistics wise, but you can still make the argument, like, this is still an ape, right?
Still,
using
still same animal, same species of the rest of us, even if our, like in the case of a child molester, we can't empathize with their pleasure drive.
Right.
I use those terms.
And
that it becomes also a hurdle for your thing, is that your premise is just that people have different pleasure drives, and how to understand that and help people empathize.
And here's the thing, maybe in the future, a drug will come out that's given to children right when they're born, or maybe when they're in the womb. Maybe this is part of genetic engineering. But that will wire the hardware to base the pleasure drive in well-being.
Okay.
So if the pleasure drive is tuned to seek healthy modes of pleasure, based on a well-being perspective, maybe that's the optimal human, and maybe that's what will lead us to utopia.
Maybe. That's
or is that just going to be a boring fucking world that no one wants to live in?
Would mean everyone enjoys the same things, and or perhaps enjoys.
Well, environments will be different, right?
Yeah, environments will be different, so they'll have their own pleasures, but pursue them in a way that like promotes well-being or something, long-term fulfillment, and not pursuing them in a destructive manner.
And maybe that's what Sam Harris is really about. But I think maybe he proposes it as the ultimatum that it isn't.
Right.
I think it is actually it's a goal. It's a system to understand what the goal should be from the perspective of human well-being. And we find out what human well-being is based on the scientific method.
Right.
So, and I totally get that. And I think Sam is dead right on that science has a lot to say about morality in some situations.
Yeah.
Or about anything. We can build a scientific model around anything. A love.
Sure.
We can build a scientific model around emotion. We can give we can make a reasonable list of things that should be present if someone is in love.
Yeah.
And a lot of people
know the chemicals involved.
Yeah. I mean, the armchair stupid question for philosophers used to be, well, prove to me that love exists. And it's like, well, okay, come on. Like, I can set up a model where a mother, child, it's
and you can
not
find
hard.
it in other species.
Or show me that air exists.
Yeah.
It's like, these are easy things to demonstrate. But yeah, like, I just find this, I think I'm onto something with making this the key focus of brain study for the future, as far as like the closer we get to genetic engineering, what do we want our future children to be like? Because people are going to damn well do it.
Right.
It's going to become the norm.
Didn't China already do it once?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think they're at least in the preliminary stages of this. So we can agree on that, I think. And I think it's important for us to move towards, we want our children to be based what we understand well-being to be in science, as opposed to what my ancient god said to these Iron Age peasants who claimed to be divinely inspired.
Yeah. But then was
don't work on a Sunday.
Times
Don't work on a Sunday. Was stoning to death. Slavery's okay. Like all this crap that is just Bronze Age bullshit. Right. And probably worse with Islam. So, yeah. I mean, are you convinced?
Am I convinced with I think the way...
Am I onto something here?
The way you're defining pleasure, and if we... the term has some connotations, which is going to be the hurdle, is that, like I said earlier, people are just going to associate with some kind of hedonist position,
Like sex.
or like
Do you
sex.
get pleasure out of anal? Like that people are going to go to oh, what do you mean? Like, I don't find it pleasurable to when I get in a fight with my boyfriend, and then I will say, well, actually, I think you do.
Yeah,
but from a pleasure drive perspective, you do.
No, they're enjoying getting into the fight, but they need to make a point.
Yes, pleasure. Yes, the pleasure drive is not about enjoyment. That's the thing. That's what people. That's the difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So you might have to make a term.
Pleasure drive is not about enjoyment. I think that's important.
That's quotable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pleasure drive is not about enjoyment.
If you use the God, that's just a language problem at this point.
Well, it's like so many difficult terms. Like atheism has this problem all the time. People think that atheism means there is no God,
right?
And it's just not that. Atheism is the only. It's a funny thing that the term exists, because it's really nonsense. That like atheism, a leprechaunist, a Santaist. It's like we don't have these words for all these other mythical things. But atheism is simply just the rejection of the claim based on lack of evidence. So,
and chances are anyone you talk to is an atheist in regards to every other god and goddess that humanity has had.
Right.
And so just
and everyone
on the list.
Yeah, I'm talking to Chazz Gist here, and I'm really enjoying this conversation. Well, why don't you tell us a bit about your new CD? What does it say here? This is Austin Hayes Trio.
Yeah.
We got Chazz Gist on bass. Dude, your hair is like super short in that photo.
Yeah.
And if we could get the camera to focus in on that. Can you see? No, that's all right. We'll make sure we put a.
I'll get in there.
Oh, let's see if we can.
See if we do it.
Okay, cool. We got a good shot of that. Awesome sauce. Oh my god, and you guys got some cool things on in the back.
Yeah, we got some hats.
And then we got Austin Hayes on drums, and Kim Henriksen on keys. Yeah. So you guys are 3-piece in this?
Yeah, and it's all original music. Most of the songs are written by Austin, our drummer.
Okay.
And then you got a couple there written by Kim, our pianist.
And how about genre? What are we expecting here?
This is rhythm trio jazz.
Okay.
So it's just there's some Latin tunes on there. Austin is very kind of old swing influenced. So it's very a lot of blues sounds.
So you're okay. So let me get this straight.
Yeah.
You're living up in Alaska,
right?
In Ketchikan.
Yes.
Playing jazz.
Yes.
And you've produced this album.
Yeah. We recorded it in
how
that
did
club.
You record that in an igloo?
No igloos. Too warm down here. But we just recorded it all in one sitting. It's all live recording. So
and can people buy this online?
This is our first time making a CD. We haven't organized anything like that yet.
But
I'll try and get it online.
So so I think the best thing you guys can do is find Chazz Gist online, and I think what we'll do is in the nature documentary, Nature of Alaska, I think we'll feature some of your guys' music.
Sure.
I'm going to buy some of your music.
There you go.
For the documentary. And at some point during the documentary, we will feature some music, maybe during our segment.
Yeah, we'll get these on CD Baby or something pretty soon, I'm sure.
Yeah.
In the meantime, if you got a hold of me online, I could send you some plus shipping.
Find Chazz Gist.
CD.
Yeah, ChazzGist, and I just said Zed.
Zed, yes.
Yeah, Z for all you Americans out there. America. But dude, thank you so much for coming on today. Such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I want to have more conversations with you, and obviously I won't be able to get up to Alaska all the time, but maybe
I'd be happy
come down to Vancouver.
Yeah, if I'm going down, or we could set up
or over
online thing, whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Well, everyone, again, this has been Chazz Gist on the Penguin Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in, and let art and science inspire. Ooh.